Keir Starmer's approval ratings are plummeting, and resentment across many different groups in the United Kingdom have resulted in a petition to call a new general election.
I remind myself that very many people didn't vote Labour at the last election.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that many of them want a rerun. That isn't how our system works. There would be plenty of people who didn't want to sit in the first place.
The Labour Party has been harshly criticised for a number of recent controversial policy proposals, but will it be enough to oust Starmer as Prime Minister?
I'm here with Paul Embery, a trade unionist, a broadcaster and writer active at GB News. Welcome, Paul Embery.
Thank you.
Now, this petition that has been levelled against the current government of Keir Starmer. What can you tell us about this?
Well, it was an initiative that was got up by just an ordinary member of the public. We've got this facility in the UK where on an official website, people can create petitions and ask other people to sign those petitions. And if the petition gains more than 100,000 signatures, then it has to be debated in Parliament. The issue at the heart of the petition has to be debated in Parliament. And this particular member of the public, who was obviously very angry at the government, felt let down by the government, said that the government had betrayed many of its promises since being elected in July, and consequently encouraged people to sign this petition. And I think at the last count, it was over 2 million people who had signed it, which means that the petition will be debated in Parliament by members of Parliament.
But what sort of effect will this actually have? I mean, you can bring this up to Parliament by virtue of this petition, but what sort of action will the politicians have to take besides just a debate?
Well, that's the point. They are not obliged to take any action at all. They will talk about it, probably not for very long, but they won't take any action because they're not obliged to take any action. And my concern over the petition is that I think it is, I think frankly, it's a waste of people's time and energy. I mean, it's gathered a lot of attention. Many people have signed it. It's been talked about in the media. It's being used to attack the Labour government. But I do think we need to get things in perspective. I mean, when the general election was held in July, the Labour Party was returned to power with a big majority, 170-seat majority, a landslide majority. However, because of the quirks of our electoral system in Britain, that didn't necessarily mean that it had widespread support out there in the country. There were millions of people who didn't vote for the Labour Party, have no particular affection for Keir Starmer or this Labour government. And I suspect that most signatures are coming from people who never wanted the Labour government in the first place. And my other concern is that it essentially it's relying on people who think that they can change society simply by going online and adding their name to a petition. And I think some people out there genuinely do think that this is going to lead to the fall of the government. It isn't going to lead to the fall of the government. They're getting a false sense of optimism from this petition, the people who want to see the end of the government. With a 170-seat majority, this government, I suspect, may become unpopular soon, but it is not going to be falling, in my view, anytime soon. The only way realistically that the government will fall is if it lost a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons, or if there was protest on the streets that got to such a level that it was impossible for the government not to call a general election. I don't suspect any of those things are going to happen anytime soon. So I think what's happening is a lot of people are investing their hope in a petition that will ultimately fizzle out into nothing, and they will probably just get a bit demoralised from that. And I'm a member of the Labour Party, although I've been very critical of Sir Keir Starmer and of this Labour government. But my advice to anyone, regardless of your politics, if you want to change society, then the way to do it is to organise and to campaign, to fight for the causes that you believe in, and not just to sit behind a keyboard and put your name on a petition, because that really isn't going to have any effect.
Well, could the petition be having any sort of putting any sort of pressure on Keir Starmer to perhaps reverse some of the more unpopular policy positions he's been having? For example, we have the censorship laws where people have been basically imprisoned for criticizing different types of policies for relating to immigration. We have, of course, the farmers' revolt almost that is going on with this tax reform that is targeting basically the farmers of the UK. Could it have any sort of effect on these types of positions that the government is taking?
It's a fair question, but in my view, no. In my view, I suspect Sir Keir Starmer is very untroubled by the fact that a couple of million people who never supported him in the first place have put their name to a petition. And it does happen from time to time. There's been previous petitions in Britain that have won at least a couple of million signatures, but didn't actually lead to any change. I've been a lifelong trade unionist, and I know that realistically the only way that you bring about change in society is through organising and campaigning and going on strike if necessary, if that's something that you can do, or taking to the streets and protesting, contacting your local member of parliament, putting pressure on local members of parliament, and so on. Those are the tried and trusted ways of bringing about change. There's no precedent in this country for change coming about as a result of people just going online and putting their name to a petition. And I don't think that alone is going to persuade Keir Starmer to change some of the things that he's done that have caused some anger. And, you know, as I said a moment ago, I've been critical of this Labour government. I think the economic policy that it's been following is completely wrong. I think it's going to lead potentially to a recession. The government does not appear to be willing to invest the necessary money in our industry, in our public services to fix society. So I've been critical of that. They've taken the winter fuel allowance away from pensioners, which I think was a wrong thing to do. I don't think the government is showing that it understands what is needed to reduce some of the very serious wealth and income inequalities that we've got in this country. And I think there are other issues. There are issues around migration. We saw the news a couple of days ago that the migration figures for the year to June 2023 were 1 million, and then the following 12 months were 728,000. These are unprecedented numbers, not necessarily directly the fault of this Labour government, because it happened during the time of the previous Tory government, but I think there's a sense among people that Labour has not got the right policies to be able to address the problem. We saw also figures a couple of days ago that 20,000 small boats had arrived across the English Channel with migrants since the Labour Party came to power in July. I think, you know, the NHS waiting list, the National Health Service waiting list are extremely high and need to be reduced. These are the things that the Labour Party needs to be really concentrating on: the economy, getting growth, cutting NHS waiting lists, cutting immigration. And I've been critical over some of those things because I don't think necessarily they're doing the right things to bring that about. But simply signing a petition is not going to persuade the Labour government to change its position. People need to be doing something else and much more than that.
Do you foresee any of these other things that people might be doing that may be more effective coming in the future? I mean, this is a government that has been in power for 5 or 4 months already, but they're vastly unpopular with many groups of society. Do you see any type of action that people could be taking that you might foresee in the near future?
Well, it's certainly true that the government's popularity, I use that term loosely, has sunk quite substantially in the few months since it's been in office. It wasn't actually particularly popular when it got elected, even though it won quite a substantial majority. It was more to do with the fact that people were so desperate to get rid of the Tory government, which millions of people simply loathed and wanted to see the back of. And the Labour Party was the only realistic alternative. And I do sense that there is a great deal of tension out there in the country. There's a simmering resentment over issues like economic insecurity, over issues like the level of immigration and integration, over issues like crime, and the apparent inability of successive governments to really get a grip on it. I think there are very serious issues over social disintegration in this country. A substantial degree of fragmentation in many of our communities because we simply haven't dealt with immigration and issues such as a clash of cultures well at all. And I think some of the payback for that is playing out now in some of our communities, and we saw some of it in response to the murders in Southport in the summer and much of the unrest that followed in Britain following that. And I do detect actually that some of these tensions can potentially spill out on the streets again, and particularly if the Labour government doesn't get to grips with some of those issues that I've mentioned and get to grips with them quickly, then I think they are going to face a great deal of hostility from the electorate. I think that's probably true.
In the past few days, Keir Starmer came out and decried the Conservative open borders policy as well, an experiment to open the borders of Britain. So he's been denouncing the immigration policy that the Tories have been having for the last few years. Do you think that Labour will actively change this policy for the remainder to get more popular, or how do you think that will turn out?
Well, he said that he knows that immigration needs to be reduced. Now, instinctively, Keir Starmer is a Liberal. He's very much similar to Tony Blair in terms of his politics. He's a North London Liberal lawyer and has always traditionally been quite relaxed about levels of immigration. But I think even he knows that when you have 12 months where 1 million people, I mean, these are astonishing figures, 1 million people in the 12 months to June 2023, and then another 728,000, as I said, last year. Even the likes of Starmer and the wider Labour Party surely recognise that these figures are unsustainable. But when you actually drill down into what it is they plan to do to reduce the figures, there isn't a lot of detail there. For example, when a minister was questioned on whether or not the Labour government would set a target, a cap on migration figures going forward, he gave the impression that they had no intention of doing so. So in theory, you could have a situation where next year, for example, the figures may come down to something like 650,000. Still colossal by historical standards in Britain, but the Labour government could argue, well, we've done what we promised. We've reduced the figures from 728,000, which were the latest figures for last year. So my view is, unless you put a cap on it to show that you are actually serious about doing it, and unless you get to grips with the small boats issue quickly, which is causing a great deal of anxiety in Britain, you can't have an ongoing situation where several thousands of mainly young men, it is mainly young men, many of them undocumented, are turning up on your shores, and the government just seems completely incapable of doing anything about it. Unless those issues are dealt with, and unless it shows that it's serious about getting to grips with those issues, like putting a cap on numbers, then I don't think necessarily people are going to have much faith that they're going to fix the system. But these are issues on which the government does not have a lot of time, because these are issues that have not just arisen in the public consciousness. The whole issue of immigration has been a running sore in our society now for many years, and public patience has run out on it. And unless the government gets to grips with it soon, as I say, I think there could be real problems.
Well, we'll see what happens the coming 4 years of the Labour government. Thank you, Paul Embery, for joining us here at Riks Europe.
Pleasure.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.